Obviously, most people that follow me know that I'm a financial planner working with high income 30 to 50 year olds. A lot of my focus is around business owners, but I would say about a third of our client base actually is very high income employees with equity compensation. If you're an employee with equity compensation or your goal is to be taking a job in the future with one, this episode is for you. Equity compensation refers to the various forms of non-cash compensation that companies provide to their employees, typically in the form of stock or stock-based instruments. Let's start with RSUs. RSUs really are the most simple one. Restricted stock units are really just a cash bonus paid in stock for you. What you'll end up finding is that you're going to get this job and maybe you already have it and you get these refreshes, but they're going to say, hey, great, with your agreement, with your salary, you're also going to get RSUs that are going to vest at a certain period of time. Vesting simply means when they become yours. So let's say, they're like, hey, starting on May 1, you're going to get 10,000 shares over the next 4 years. You're going to get none until the end of year one. At the end of year one, you're going to get 25%. So 2,500 shares. And then typically what happens is you end up getting like 1/48 a month after that. You'll hit May 1 of next year, you'll get 25%, and then you're going to start to get about 2% a month. Those become yours as they vest. If you leave before they vest, they become worthless. How these work is that you're taxed at your income rate the day those vest. It's basically seen as a bonus. So let's say you're getting $10,000 worth on May 1 of next year. What ends up happening is you owe income taxes at your marginal tax bracket. So let's say you're in the 32% tax bracket and you live in Texas and have no state taxes. What ends up happening is you'd owe $3,200 of tax. Most times what they do is they're going to sell shares to cover. You can choose to not have them sell shares to cover, but most times you want to, and most times they're only going to sell at 22%. You might be in the 32% bracket, but they withhold enough shares to cover 22%. So that's going to mean that you're probably going to owe taxes come tax time. For most of my high income earners, I have clients who are getting 100,000 to $1 million in RSUs a year. So this is an issue, right? Because let's say you get 500,000 of RSUs in a year and it under withholds by 15% because you're in the 37% bracket. That's a $75,000 under withhold. You're going to probably need to pay quarterly taxes. You're going to need to be aware of safe harbor taxes. And I'm going to talk about all this in a different episode. You need to do good tax planning here. How RSUs work is you get a set schedule, they vest and they become yours. Income taxes are due the date they vest, and then it's your choice of what you do from there. So let's say 10,000 shares vest on May 1. They sell $2,200 to withhold for taxes. You have $7,800 left. It's your choice what to do. You can sell that date as long as you're not in a blackout period. If you are, you can set up a plan that actually allows you to just sell automatically. But for most people, you want to view this as a cash bonus because you already paid the taxes. So if you sell that date, there's no taxes. If you hold for and sell within a year, you pay short-term capital gains tax on the growth. Or if it's over a year, you pay long-term capital gains. This is something people mix up all the time. They don't really understand the taxes are due that date. So they think they have to hold for a year to get long-term capital gains, but that's only on the part in the growth or the decline from the date they vest. If your company handed you $7,800 today, would you buy the company stock? 9 times out of 10, people say no. They're like, I'd rather, I already have equity there. I already work there. My income's reliant on this company. I want to diversify and go somewhere else. And so if that's how you feel, there really isn't any reason to continue to hold the stock. If you're like, hey, I've built up a good financial position, I like this company, I'm okay having a little concentration there, then you can hold. But you really want to evaluate this. Most people, what ends up happening that I work with is forever, they've just been under withholding. They've been have to come out of cash to pay taxes, which means you're effectively choosing to become even more concentrated in that stock. So you want to view the RSUs just like cash, and then view how you want to use those dollars. So stock options are definitely a little bit more complex. And there's 2 types of stock options. We're going to start with non-qualified stock options. These are very similar in the schedule like in RSU. So what they'll say is, hey, great, you're going to get 10,000 shares that vest over 4 years. And what happens is you have a 1-year cliff. So at year 1, you get 2,500 shares, but it's not that you're given these shares, you're given the right to purchase those shares. And then typically you're going to have that same every month more are going to vest. What's important to understand here is how they're taxed. Let's say that you have the right to buy 2,500 shares at a price of $1. What ends up happening is the cost would be 2,500 shares by $1, $2,500 to exercise. But it doesn't stop there. With NSOs, you pay income tax on the spread when you exercise. So we said it's $1, great. But let's say the stock price is $10, right? Or let's use 11 to make it more simple. So the difference between 11 and 1 is $10. 2,500 shares times by $10, 25,000 is kind of that spread, and you're going to pay income taxes on that $25,000 spread. So let's say that, you're in the 32% bracket plus states, you're at 37. Well, you're going to pay 37% tax on that $25,000 spread. With NSOs, it's a little bit harder, right? You have to really say, do I want to exercise? Do I think that the stock's ever going to be valuable? Because let's say you're at a private company and you decide, hey, I'm going to exercise. It's grown already to be $10, $11 a share. I want to try to minimize those income taxes. Well, the issue is if that company never has a liquidity event, never sells, and you never can actually get cash for those dollars or for those shares, you ended up paying income taxes for nothing. The safe route on NSOs is say, I'm going to wait till later, till a known liquidity event has happened. I'm going to have way more income tax. I'm going to take home less dollars, but at least I'm sure that I'm going to take home dollars. The higher risk, lower tax route would say, I'm going to exercise early when I can, knowing that I am going to have tax, but potentially I might get nothing for this. And so you really need to weigh risk versus tax planning. And that can be pretty hard to do. Obviously, if you're a publicly traded company and there's known value and you're able to sell whenever, that makes things a lot easier. So the next one is incentive stock options. Incentive stock options, also called ISOs, are more favorable tax-wise than NSOs. How these work, same example is, you have the 10,000 shares. At the end of year one, 2,500 become yours, and you can buy them for $1, so 2,500. Now what it looks like is we have that spread, $10, 10 times 2,500 is $25,000 of spread. With ISOs, you don't pay income tax on that difference. You only pay tax if you trigger what's called the alternative minimum tax, also known as AMT. So this is where tax planning is really valuable. We use tax software to do this, and we'd say, okay, great. Hey, based on your income, taxes, etc., you have 50,000 of room to exercise without triggering AMT. This person could exercise, no tax would be paid. Now they get to hold and get long-term capital gains when they sell in the future. But let's say a different example, you only had $10,000 of room. Okay, great. You had 15,000 of spread above that. Now you're going to pay 26 or 28% AMT tax, which is obviously a lot, but know that in the future, that does come back via credit in years that you are not triggering AMT. Let's just kind of keep going through taxes wise. So if the shares acquired through the exercise of ISOs are held for a certain period of time, usually this is at least 1 year from the date of exercise and 2 years from the date of grant, then the gains on the sale will be taxed at long-term capital gains treatment. NSOs, less favorable. A lot of times what makes sense is waiting till later and knowing there's a value. ISOs, a lot of times people actually exercise earlier because there isn't that income tax spread. And so the earlier you do it, the less likely you are to trigger AMT. Because if you wait till longer, I've worked with clients who are really stuck. It's grown so much that the AMT tax will be hundreds of thousands of dollars if they exercise. And that's never necessarily going to get easier. Let's go to employee stock purchase plans, also known as ESPPs. Employee stock purchase plans allow you to purchase company stock, usually at a discounted price. And this all happens through payroll. So typically, the max that you can do is $25,000 a year. They're going to basically take money every paycheck, and then they are going to buy at the end of the period. It's typically it can go anywhere from 3 to 24 months. The most common time frame we see is 6 months. There's this period of time at the start where you get to enroll into it. Then every paycheck, they withhold money. And then at the end, at the purchase date, they buy it. There's two main things that we need to know about here. One is the discount. So what you'll see is a lot of times there's what's called a 15% discount. This is what basically the best situation you can have. So let's say, it starts at $90. At the end of 6 months, the stock is worth $100. What ends up happening is you get to buy 15% off $100. So for $85, you get to buy those shares. That's a 17.65% rate of return. Super good. But let me add in another variable here. A lot of plans also have what's called a look back provision. The look back provision means that they either get to buy at the start date or the purchase date, whichever's lower. In that example, 90 versus 100, they'll end up buying 15% off the 90. So now you got to buy for 15% off 90. I don't know the math there. That's like 76 or 77. So now you got to buy $100 stock for $77. So you get this really great embedded gain. You can sell right then. If you really want to just lock in and use this as an efficiency tool, then you typically want to sell right away. So we have a lot of people who are not interested in holding their company stock, but this match with this, basically match or this discount, this free money you get by getting the discount and the look back provision makes it worthwhile to do and then just sell and reallocate. Like I said, again, maximum is 15%. If you have a plan that's only 5% with no look back provision, after taxes, that might only be like a 3% gain. So Sometimes people say I'll still do that, but typically they only do that if they want to hold the company stock. That difference of 3% typically isn't worth it if you don't want to hold the stock. Totally up to you. And then from there, any gains or losses from the sale of shares purchased through the ESPP are going to be taxed either at short-term or long-term capital gains depending on the holding period. This is where you have to know it's really called a qualified or non-qualified position. Primary difference is qualified ESPPs follow specific guidelines that defer the taxes so long as that they hold onto the shares for the duration to get that holding period, typically 1 year or more. Non-qualified is typically when it's taxed at ordinary income rates, and that's when you typically hold for less than a year. Let me walk through kind of the rules for a qualifying position. This happens when you sell your shares at least 1 year after you purchase them and at least 2 years after the offering date. So you need to know both of those timelines. A qualifying position will usually come with ordinary income tax and long-term capital gains. Let me walk through an example for you. So let's say Jim was offered this ESPP 2 years ago. He buys them immediately, and then 2 years later, he sells them. The offering date, it was $100. The purchase date was $110, and he got a 15% discount. He ended up being able to buy the shares for $85. Now, let's assume that Jim's in the 24% marginal bracket and 15% long-term capital gains bracket. Jim sells these shares at $150 in the future. Here's the tax that Jim will owe. He'll have the $15 gain times by 24%, which means he has an ordinary income tax of $360. And really this is just looking at like, what's the difference between the price on the offering date and that price that they actually paid. That amount is going to be taxed at income rates. And then from that offering date, that $100 to what he sells it at $150, he's going to pay long-term capital gains. So 150 minus 100 is 50. That's the difference. Times by the 100 shares times by 15% means he'll pay $750 capital gains tax. Just recapping this, right? The difference between the price on the offering date and the discount, you're going to pay income tax on. Whatever that difference on the discount is always going to be taxed at income rates. And then the rest of it is going to come at long-term capital gains rates. And that's only if you have a qualifying position. Total tax there, $360 plus $750 is $1,110 of tax. I know this is confusing. You know, there's some good pictures to look at, and even the pictures are confusing. But just know on the qualifying position, long-term capital gains on the growth, because you've held it long enough, the discount part is taxed at income rates. Now, what happens if you have a disqualifying position? If the holding period requirements are not satisfied to be qualified, then that's when you have a disqualifying position, which means you're going to be subject to ordinary income tax on the vast majority of it. Let's look at an example here. Same example with Jim, but the difference is Jim sells his shares less than 2 years after the offering date and less than 1 year after the purchase date, which means it's disqualifying position. This entire part for him is taxed at income rates. Basically, Jim's going to owe $600 for the first part, so 110 minus 85 times 100 times 24%, $600. Then he also owes income taxes on the 150 minus the 110 times the 100 shares times 24%, 960. I know I went through that really quick. At the end of the day, both parts here are taxed at income. So in both situations, the discount, taxed at income rates, but then also the growth here, because it's a disqualifying position, was also taxed at income rates. So in this one, he paid $1,560 of tax. Last example I want to go through is if Jim were to have sold less than 2 years after the offering date, but at least 1 year after the purchase date. So this is really important. So it ends up becoming very similar to the last one, except for the gain on the shares sold get to be taxed at long-term capital gains rates, but the discount is at ordinary income rate. Jim's going to owe 110 minus 85 times 100 times 24%, so $600 because that's income tax. But then on the growth, from that 110, so 110 to 150, he's going to pay capital gains. So this is very similar to the first example. The only difference is because of that time period, they end up not being able to use the offering date price. They have to use the purchase date price. And that's what's really important. ESPP taxes do get very complex, right? I typically like to use it if you're going to have a good 15% discount or 15 plus look back. If it's only 5%, then it ends up becoming less advantageous. Again, these are things that you typically want an advisor to help you with. RSUs are the easiest. They vest, income taxes are due. You want to make sure it withholds enough. It typically only withholds at 22% until you get to above $1 million in RSUs. Then we have ISOs. ISOs, you get the right to buy that stock at a discount. And that one, you only pay tax on the spread if it triggers AMT. NSOs, same thing, but you pay income tax on that spread. Then ESPP is the ability to buy your company stock over a certain interval, typically at a discount. Hopefully, this helps you understand your situation a little better. A lot of times when I sit down with people with equity comp, they don't even know the type they have. They don't know if they have an ESPP plan. They don't know the discount. They don't know if they have ISOs. They don't know if they have NSOs. You don't want this to be you. It's really hard to plan if you don't even know the type of equity comp you have. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and go follow my page for more personal finance content. And as always, if you have any thoughts, please leave it in the comments below, and I promise to get back to each individual comment. See you next week.